Barraza confessed to 4 murders, but was actually convicted of 11 killings and 5 counts of aggravated burglary. Investigators believe that she may have been responsible for murdering up to 49 old ladies in total, which, if true, would make her the most prolific serial killer in Mexican history, man or woman. She is currently serving 759 years in prison. La Dama del...
What's good, y'all? It's your boy Ross back at it again with another video. So we're gonna check out the most evil wrestlers in real life, part 1. This is by Listmania Wrestling. This should be a very interesting one, man. There's been some unfortunately evil individuals that have been a part of the wrestling business. There's obviously evil individuals a part of any entertainment, sports, league, whatever the case may be. But unfortunately, there's been some evil people that have been involved in wrestling, whether it comes to taking people's money, not paying them the right amount, or physical, emotional abuse. Like, we've seen and heard some stories over the years, man. So we're gonna check this out. Should be a very interesting one. Appreciate all the love and support. Let's get right into it, man.
Scholars, imbeciles, tough guys, sissies, cool kids, geeks, and every extreme in between. But then there are the standouts, oddballs, the maniacs, the con men, those with personality disorders, anger issues, or straight up psychopaths. This is Listmania Wrestling's biggest pieces of shit in wrestling history, part 1.
Alright, let's check this out. I like the retro vibe to this, man. I actually do. It's actually pretty cool.
Now, we are talking about your usual scumbags here. To qualify for this list, you either have had to have been convicted of a heinous crime, or there be a huge amount of anecdotal evidence pointing towards some incredibly untoward behavior. Now, there are indeed dozens of wrestling personalities we actually wanted to include in this list, but we've whittled it down to the following entries. But don't worry, there will be at least 2 more videos of this topic in the future.
Okay.
But we're going to give a spoiler right now. Chris Benoit is not on this list. The reason being is that Family Annihilator Chris Benoit's story is just far too sprawling to pare down to just a couple of minutes. So we will be dedicating an entire video entirely to him in the future. But for now, let's get to number 1.
Grizzly Smith.
Aurelian Grizzly Smith, I hope we pronounced that right, is a great example of a number of people in the business talking about just what a good guy they were, when in reality, he really was a festering turd in the punch bowl. Now, we're going to get to his existence as a serial predatory abuser of children in a second, but first let's get through to the trauma he inflicted on his own children. As many wrestlers did back in the day, Grizzly kayfabed his family. But Grizzly really did go above and beyond, though, making his children believe at times that he may actually die in the ring at the hands of his opponents, and totally traumatize his children in the process. And that's when he was even home, which was, quite frankly, very seldom, maybe a couple of times a year. Now, neither of these traits was uncommon in traveling wrestlers at the time, but that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Grizzly. The mother of Grizzly's most famous son, now known as Jake the Snake Roberts, was 13 years old when Jake was born. And if you thought Grizzly just liked them young, he also liked them related. As when his daughter Robin Smith, aka Rockin' Robin, reached around about 8 or 9 years old, her dear old daddy Grizzly started abusing her too. Grizzly Smith would also have a cadre of preteen admirers/victims with him in the dressing room, or even as travel companions with him on the road, sometimes with the girl being sent off with Grizzly with the permission of the girl's parents. Somehow all of that isn't even the worst crime of Grizzly's if his daughter Robin is to be believed. When Robin was 14, she finally told her mother of the years of unwanted physical attention at the hands of her father, and they both left the house and threatened to shoot Grizzly if it ever happened again. 2 weeks later, Robin's half-sister Jo Lynn, whom Robin believed went through the same terrible ordeals as her, was kidnapped by 2 assailants, one of them Jo Lynn's husband's ex-wife. The ex-wife copped to aggravated kidnap, but not murder, as Jo Lynn's body was never found. But Robin believed her father Grizzly Smith had orchestrated the whole thing, possibly because Jo Lynn had something incriminating on Grizzly that would cost him his career and even his freedom. The mystery was never solved, although Grizzly's total lack of interest in Jo Lynn's disappearance and presumed murder didn't engender much confidence in his innocence.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. If you just don't really care about someone that you care about disappearing and obviously getting, unalived, you don't care? You don't want to make assumptions, but that's kind of telling. Jesus, bro, we starting off Starting off like this. Tammy. Yep.
Okay, let's get to the good things about Tammy Lynn Sytch out of the way first. So, number one, she was hugely talented, and number two, she was really hot in the days before broadband internet. Now let's get to the bad. She was, and still is most probably, a clinical psychopath. She was the most hated person in every wrestling company she ever worked for because of her diva-like attitude before the word diva was even a WWF trademark. She has always been an habitual self-serving liar. She was, and still is, probably a serious drug and alcohol addict that inflamed her already wildly unhinged personality type that just seems as addicted to creating drama as anything else. She was a serial cheater on her long-term partner Chris Candido, which drove him to the brink of suicide. A number of wrestlers have claimed that she serviced them in exchange for somas or to get ahead in whatever goal she was striving to achieve. She's violently attacked ex-boyfriends because she apparently cannot take rejection, and racked up numerous DUIs that eventually culminated on March 25th, 2022, when she killed an innocent 75-year-old man. Of course, none of this was her fault. Obviously, the DUI manslaughter is the most grave of the crimes mentioned above, but the brief outline was that essentially, while she was heavily intoxicated, the 49-year-old Tammy Lynn Sytch, who was driving at a high rate of speed, ploughed into the back of the stationary car driven by a 75-year-old Julian Lasseter, resulting in his death, as well as causing damage to a third car and injuries all around. Blood was obtained at the scene, and Tammy Sytch was later determined to be 3.5 times over the Florida legal drink drive limit. And eventually, it must be said, because she was free for weeks, finally detained after having her bond revoked. But not before she tried to blame her personal downfall on everything from made-up medical ailments to Chris Candido.
Hardbody Harrison. We know about,
if The Godfather and Ice Cube
Sonny
has taught us anything back in the 1990s, it's that pimping ain't easy. Enter Hardbody Harrison Norris Jr., a WCW jobber from 1996 to 1999. He decided to simplify that process. Instead of pimping out freelance hookers and taking the lion's share of their money, he decided why not just have a bunch of women live with me in my houses. And they may not even have to be prostitutes, but I will break their spirits and force them into going on the game, and not the Triple H kind. Oh, and also they're not allowed to leave my house for any reason unless I say so. That would sure cut down on all those pesky women going in and out of my house at all hours of the day, slamming the front door and waking the neighbours. It seemed that there were so many benefits of this arrangement to the man whose body is hard that he forced at least 8 women into sexual servitude working out of his 2 Georgia homes. Eventually, the hard-bodied one was caught and put on trial. Apparently, Harrison didn't save that money from that WCW racial discrimination class action lawsuit that he was part of, as he decided to represent himself in front of the judge. The old adage of the man who represents himself in court has a fool for a client proved to be true, no matter how hard the client's body may have been. Victims testifying for the prosecution described in vivid detail how Harrison used his previous experience as an army sergeant to impose a strict military-style structure to their lives. Harrison would also beat them when they got out of line, and one witness even testified that Harrison threatened to throw her through a hotel window if she did not serve his 2 clients. Suck on that one, did he? And when Harrison's slaves weren't having roughies with paying punters, they were doing household chores, interior decorating, and garden landscaping. If these poor ladies thought they were down on their luck before, Hardbody Harrison also once forced all 8 involuntary companions into attending a Vince Russo-run wrestling show. And no, that's not a joke. On the counts of aggravated sexual abuse and forced labor and sex trafficking conspiracy and witness tampering, Hardbody Harrison was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Damn. Rock and roll.
Rock and roll buck ZumHofe made his name in the AWA with Ghetto Blaster in hand and bedecked in an Elvis Presley Vegas-era jumpsuit long before the Honky Tonk Man put a single leg in a pair of sequined flares. A quick overview, if you'll bear with us, of ZumHofe's career. He feuded with Mr. Electricity Steve Regal in the AWA for the light heavyweight title in the early 80s. Then he had a stint in Dallas for the Von Erichs, and then he went to the AWA, and he did some prison time for having inappropriate physical contact with a minor in 86. He went back to the AWA once again in its dying days, and then he did some jobs for the WWF in the late 80s. He did 36 months in prison for yet more inappropriate physical contact with another minor, and then he did more jobs for the WWF up until 1996. Then in 2014, a judge handed down a 25-year sentence to the 62-year-old classic rock and roller for molesting his own daughter from the age of 15, a habit he kept up for the next 12 years. ZumHofe would even bring his broken horribly abused daughter to wrestling shows he was booked on, and it didn't go unnoticed by other workers that the way they interacted was kind of more than a little suspect.
Yeah.
Of course, none of them actually did anything about it, though. After finally gaining the courage to escape from her father's clutches, ZumHofe's daughter went to the police. In this particular instance, justice was actually relatively swift, as it took less than a year from the initial arrest to sentencing to get this particularly dangerous, incestuous kiddie fiddler off the streets. And to add to the decades of heinous depravity, ZumHofe also proved to be a little bitch, attempting to evade the justice he so richly deserved by escaping from the courthouse through an open bathroom window.
Damn.
So as the trial concluded, instead of accepting his guilt and the fate he had so long deserved to suffer through, he decided to run one more time.
Sick, bro. Steve Gatorwolf. Sick.
Now, here's a name we imagine won't be on the tip of many of your tongues. Steve Gatorwolf, aka Stephen Ketcher, was a crappy wrestler who achieved a level of non-fame in the WWF as a jobber, yet somehow snuck into the music video of the WWF's Land of a Thousand Dances from the wrestling album back in 1985. According to my old podcast cohort Don Morocco, Gatorwolf wasn't actually pleased about doing the traditional Indian gimmick of whooping and war dancing in a circle and throwing tomahawk chops. Also, Morocco noted that Gatorwolf was a horrible dancer. In later years, Gatorwolf would actually reveal public signs of being a scumbag by being sentenced to 2 years for aggravated assault in Utah in 2001, and then being arrested again in Utah in 2008 for holding MMA and tough man contests and fight club style events without a license. But the real headline in Steve Gatorwolf's criminal career broke on May 8th, 2014, when he handed himself into the sheriff's department in Clay County, Florida, where he was charged with 7 felony counts of sexual assault on a preteen girl, as well as 7 counts of carnal abuse on Gatorwolf's girlfriend at the time's 15-year-old daughter.
What is wrong with y'all, man?
The assault started when she was 14, by the way, so she was afraid, obviously, to report the rapes at first because he was a former pro wrestler and he was a big guy. But the court documents also say that Gatorwolf told the victim that he would kill himself if she told someone about what he was doing to her because he didn't want to go back to prison. A great shame he didn't follow through with that threat.
Bro, what is going on? Bro, this is sick. Just sick individuals. What's wrong with y'all, bro?
Another fall for a client, the Native American nonce defended himself inadequately and got 16 hard years' time for his trouble. On the same YouTube video where Don Morocco discusses Gatorwolf, we actually received a comment from somebody purporting to be Steve's niece, and even she said that he was indeed a lowly, contemptuous maggot, a piece of sputum floating in the toilet bowl of life. Not her exact words, of course, but you get the picture.
Mel Phillips. Yeah, bro, what's going on with y'all, man?
And now we get to Mel Phillips, the WWF's first black ring announcer. His almost aloof style heralded the arrival to the ring of every great WWF name from the 1980s to the early 1990s. He was also a predatory paedophile who had a penchant for young boys and, in particular, their feet. In fact, Mel Phillips had actually been fired from the WWF in 1988 over such accusations, before being hired back a short time later after Vince McMahon, WWF head honcho, wagged his finger, tutted, and made him pinky promise to steer clear from those kids in future. In a sworn affidavit signed by Phillips and others, most visible victim Tom Cole, Mel would frequently caress plaintiff's feet and would rub them against Phillips' own genital area. Another complainant alleged that Phillips would often take him aside and play a game with him, quote unquote, where Phillips would then rub plaintiff's feet and toes against his crotch and would pull plaintiff's toes apart until plaintiff screamed. And of course, Mel Phillips was accused of much more than playing with young boys' feet. Oh, and if you didn't play ball, or, with his balls as it were, you, young lad, would soon find yourself out of your dream job working for the WWF, setting up rings, general dog's bodywork, and seeing your superheroes up close instead of from, behind the guardrail, I guess, with the rest of them.
I think this is maybe around the time of the, I know they talked about it in the Vince McMahon documentary, but I didn't know much about it. I think the Ring Boys scandal, so I don't know if this coincides with that, but yeah, that's sick. And the fact that he was hired back and basically higher ups like Vince and them just like, hey, bro, just chill out with that, bro. And then he didn't chill. Like, that's sick, bro.
marks. Most shockingly, Phillips had apparently been caught by some wrestlers giving oral sex to a 10-year-old boy in a car all the way back in 1982. According to Tom Cole, who first encountered Phillips at the age of 13, Mel would have ring boys in every major town.
Yep.
He would groom the children, and then most of whom were obviously vulnerable and from broken homes, and then take them on the road with the usually neglectful parent or guardian's permission, and do whatever it is he wanted to do with them when nobody could hear them scream. Mel would be released from the WWF for good in the early 1990s. In fact, the FBI, who had actually had a file on the now unemployed ring announcer, were actually going to bring Mel Phillips on board to testify against Vince McMahon and the WWF when the FBI were building a case against Vince for steroid distribution. Now, this is particularly unbelievable considering that they actually had knowledge of a videotape of Mel cavorting, this is a quote, cavorting with some ring boys, and that had been known to exist since at least 1993. Mel died without having to face justice in 2012, and Tom Cole, one of Mel's many victims, as well as allegedly a victim of Terry Garvin and Pat Patterson, killed himself in 2021 at the age of 50. Some of the other surviving alleged victims of Mel are currently attempting to sue WWE, Vince McMahon, and his wife Linda McMahon for allowing the abuse to continue under their watch.
Yeah, that's cold, bro. That's sick, man.
And how can we talk about Mel Phillips without mentioning Terry Garvin of the famous fake Garvin family? Not only were Terry and Ronnie and Jimmy not actually related, but unlike the Andersons, none of their surnames were even Garvin. A long-time wrestler and openly gay in a time not particularly accepting of such persuasions, Terry Garvin would work the territories for a couple of decades before landing an office job with the WWF in 1985 after being approached by Vince McMahon's second-in-command, Pat Patterson, also openly gay. Then the accusations start coming thick and fast. Not only was Garvin also implicated in the aforementioned ring boy scandal with Mel Phillips and Pat Patterson, he also had sway with the WWF's head booker, who also happened to be Pat Patterson. Now, before we continue, the reason that Pat Patterson is not on this list but Terry Garvin is because Patterson, as best we can tell, has been accused of being highly inappropriate with some talent and ring boys, but Terry Garvin would actually explicitly use his influence within the WWF to try and have sex with them, as well as contracted wrestlers. If Terry's advances were rebuffed, the ring boys could be fired, and so could the wrestlers, quite frankly, as well, or at least booked into oblivion. Barry Orton, Cowboy Bob Orton's brother and Randy Orton's uncle, sure seemed to think so, as did Jim Powers, who had huge upside yet was booked like a total chump, and that was if he was booked at all the second he turned down Garvin's advances. Once the news of underage ring boys being taken advantage of broke,
and it's crazy because that sounds about right. We've heard I forgot the wrestler's name, but they basically was like, bruh, there was times where, you know, people grabbed me and inappropriately, and we talking like male wrestler, guy wrestler, and there was nothing he could do. But there was really nothing you could do because who are you gonna tell? They're the head booker. What are you gonna do? You just gotta chill, because if not, you oppose. That's your job. That's fucked, bro. That's so fucked up.
Into the national press, Terry Garvin was fired from the WWF in 1992, along with Mel Phillips and Pat Patterson. Garvin died of cancer in 1998, once again, never facing justice.
Jimmy Snuka. Yeah, I know about this one.
Once one of the most exciting and electrifying wrestlers in the world, Jimmy Superfly Snuka's career has been marred by the accusation, well, basically the fact, quite frankly, that in 1983 he graduated from smacking around his girlfriend, Nancy Argentino, to accidentally, or maybe even purposely, killing her in a hotel room. On May 11, 1983, Nancy was found dead in her and Jimmy's hotel room with a skull fracture. How it happened, nobody fully knows, and Jimmy Snuka, after making up a variety of stories at the time and in later life, has never admitted responsibility. But essentially what is universally believed to have happened is that Jimmy and Nancy got into an argument, and then Jimmy, hepped up on cocaine and steroids and goofballs and flippy whippies and flying willards and whatever else he was on, purposely shoved her over and killed her. The case mysteriously just disappeared after 3 weeks, despite the coroner reporting the death as a homicide, with one long-standing rumour suggesting that Vince McMahon himself made the case disappear by presenting a case of his own to the police. a briefcase full of cash. Months earlier, another bout of domestic abuse in a motel room would lead to the following famous story. A naked Jimmy Snuka was arrested after hurting Nancy, but it took 9 police officers with attack dogs to finally subdue him.
That's insane.
The media reported the story as one big joke, despite the domestic abuse angle. And to make matters worse, Jimmy had abusive form after Nancy's death when he attacked his wife later that year, that time with no files being charged. Beloved by the fans and a real scumbag to his partners, Snuka's crazed drug use was affecting his personal and professional life.
Yeah.
He was becoming more unpredictable and delved deeper down the powder white rabbit hole when he found he was being passed over as a #1 choice to become the WWF champion for the incoming Hulk Hogan. Vince McMahon saw Jimmy as a total liability. He was, and he got rid of him in 1985. Snuka returned to the company a few years later in a reduced role in his last full-time wrestling gig with a major company. And then Snuka would wrestle on the indies for many years after, then write a book where he briefly talked about the Nancy Argentino death and made up a load of nonsense explaining why he really had, nothing to do with it. Ironically, his own biography renewed interest in the Nancy case, and he finally found himself in court facing a murder charge over 30 years after the fact, before being found incompetent to stand trial due to accelerating dementia symptoms. Many eyeballs rolled at the time as people, probably rightly assumed that Snuka was doing the caveman me no understand routine that he'd also acted out initially when he was confronted by police after Nancy's death, only to die a few days later of stomach cancer in 2017, aged 73.
That's insane, bro. Jeez,
USWA, Memphis, 1996, the wrestling territory that hung in there long after all the other wrestling territories had gone bankrupt or given up in the wake of Vince McMahon and the WWF juggernaut taking over the business. It was on its very last legs by 1996. The Memphis territory had actually been on its last legs since like 1988 or so actually, but thanks to owner Jerry Jarrett severely cutting costs like, production and wrestler pay, Memphis was able to hold on, keep on trucking for nearly a decade past its sell-by date, developing its fair share of future talent as well as all-time creative turkeys in equal measure. And another name that's on the tip of the tongue of absolutely nobody, despite outright, stealing the monikers of some of wrestling's most famous players, is one of these turkeys. The Macho Warrior Rick Hogan looked to be the unholy union between Doodlove and a pregnant hippo.
What the
Adept
hell?
in oversized sunglasses and do-rag and 5XL red vest reading Macho Warrior rules and custard yellow tights, the 6'6" tub of goo would impersonate Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan in his promos about as accurately as Bret Hart emulating Ric Flair's woo. Michael Imbergia, the journeyman wrestler who briefly portrayed the walking trademark infringement case, achieved nothing of note beyond briefly unseating Brian Christopher as USWA Heavyweight Champion, before losing it to USWA Unified World Heavyweight Champion, the Colorado Kid, 3 weeks later. Now, this is actually less impressive than it sounds due to pretty much every wrestler who passed through Memphis in the 1990s quickly winning a USWA Championship of some description. Rick Hogan would quickly slither out of USWA and start appearing in an even more wretched hive of scum and villainy in Ian Rotten's IWA Mid-South, as well as some niche hardcore promotions in Japan up until about 2002 when his career abruptly ended. It turns out that to supplement his wrestling habit, the 30-year-old Imbergia also DJ'd at a Cincinnati strip club. The club itself ended up being raided by police after violations were alleged, and Imbergia, among others, were arrested. As part of the investigation, Imbergia's computer, as well as computer disks, were seized. The computer was found to have a significant quote-unquote amount of indecent images featuring minors, as well as other incriminating documents, and Imbergia was charged with 10 counts of pandering sexually orientated material involving a minor. While I'm sure it was just a sorry coincidence, of course, it isn't lost on us that a wrestler with an unhealthy fascination in young teenage girls would find a home, albeit briefly, in Memphis wrestling.
Jeez, bro. Bro, there's some sick individuals in
For
wrestling,
our final shitbag on this
Jeez.
list, we introduce you to Juana Barraza, aka La Dama del Silencio, or in English, the Lady of Silence. Now, we've had DVs and child abusers and straight-up murderers, but here we have an honest-to-goodness serial killer. Born in 1957, Barraza was indeed a professional wrestler, although one confined to the lower independent ranks. La Dama del Silencio was also indeed her professional wrestling name, once explaining that she was called this because, and here's the quote, "I am quiet and keep to myself. It turns out that the life of a traveling mass professional wrestler makes for a fantastic cover when committing multiple murders while traveling across the country. Better known as the old lady killer, Barraza would befriend women aged 60 or older, con them into believing she was like some kind of social worker who was offering to sign them up for a welfare program, and then, when she had gained access to their house, beat or strangled the old woman to death, before of course stealing items of religious significance from the victim as a keepsake. Barraza's first victim is disputed but could be any time from the late 1990s to 2003. But what is known is that she started killing sometime after she hit the age of 40. Her son had tragically been killed in an attempted mugging, and her own upbringing had been filled with the most horrid abuse courtesy of her alcoholic mother, and a string of men she lent to her daughter for a couple of bottles of the Mexican equivalent of Carlsberg Special Brew. Barraza was finally captured in 2006 thanks to an eyewitness spotting a middle-aged, sturdy woman running from an apartment where Barraza had just strangled yet another old woman to death, this time with a stethoscope. Mexican authorities have been searching for a male assailant or even a transvestite the entire time, despite previous witnesses describing a heftily built woman hovering over crime scenes. Barraza confessed to 4 murders, but was actually convicted of 11 killings and 5 counts of aggravated burglary. Investigators believe that she may have been responsible for murdering up to 49 old ladies in total, which, if true, would make her the most prolific serial killer in Mexican history, man or woman. She is currently serving 759 years in prison. Now, Dama Del Solenko has not only been the subject of various podcasts and television series profiling her, but Juana Barraza remains the most evil person to ever be associated with professional wrestling. We hope you enjoyed.
That's serving 700 plus years is crazy. That is insane. What just possesses you? I mean, he briefly talked about her abuse and the things he dealt with, but still, what makes you snap to just say, I'm just gonna start killing old people, bro? What? Yeah. I think the general consensus here in this video that I was able to kind of pick up on, and I don't know if y'all did, the general consensus is a lot of people dealing with a lot of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, substance abuse. That's the general consensus. Everybody that was damn near featured in this had something going on with that. Granted, some was just sick, weirdo perverts, but for the most part, the general consensus is drug abuse, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, kind of being something that kind of, is like the common theme. I don't know, bro. This is crazy. This is only part 1. I don't know if he has a part 2. If he does, let me know down below. We'll definitely check it out, man. But yeah, bro, wrestling has definitely had some evil individuals, man. But comment down below. Let me know some other wrestling related videos y'all want me to check out. I definitely will. I appreciate all love, support. Road to 20K. Appreciate y'all kicking it with me. See you on the next one. Peace.